So what's a nice progressive politician like Walter Mosley doing in an arch-conservative outfit like the NRA? The move to sign up came after Democratic State Senator Liz Krueger from Manhattan suggested 2 weeks ago that if enough gun control advocates join the NRA, it could potentially reshape the organization.
Well, our next guest, however, claims he is doing it to keep himself informed about the enemy rather than trying to change the group. Will it work, or will he end up just contributing money to the opposition? Let's hear directly now from the newly inducted NRA member and the 57th District New York State Assembly member, Walter Mosley. Welcome back to BK Live,
Thank
sir.
you for having me, Brian Adams.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. You know, this was a really surprise move, quite unexpected. So can you tell us what was the thinking behind this decision? Why did you join the NRA?
Well, again, thank you for having me on the show. I listen to a lot of progressive shows, and including this one, and I read a lot of progressive articles and books. And I came across one article that talked about, you know, taking the narrative, owning the narrative. And a lot of times, sometimes when we are in our own environments, our comfortable surroundings, we tend to not step beyond them and really make ourselves uncomfortable when dealing with such a tremendous issue like gun violence and gun violence awareness. So to me, you know, and obviously my membership was already in the process, and I had already been a member, you know, before Senator Krueger had made that statement. But my objective was, in becoming a member, is to not be, you know, a gun-toting NRA member, to not want the desire to have a gun, but to take charge of the narrative, to own the narrative, to be a part of the narrative. And the only way you're going to do that if you step in the arena. And that means going to the regional conventions, you know, if I have the ability to do so, or going to the national convention, which I do plan to do in May in Louisville, Kentucky, to see firsthand where's the genesis of many of these thoughts and applications and philosophies that the NRA and some of their members are so beholden to.
So you're sort of popping a progressive bubble, you know?
I hope that I will not be the sole one. You know, I'm not looking, you know, for this to be a sole venture. I hope that other like-minded progressives will come on board and get out of their own comfort zone and be a part of the conversation down in Louisville, Kentucky, in the heart.
Why were you the one to do it?
I don't know why.
Did you take a volunteer or?
No, I don't know why. It just so happens that I was a member, and then Senator Krueger made the statement, and some people reached out to me and said, you know, I guess they were kind of, you know, polling some of the electeds, and I said, yeah, I'm an NRA member, and they were quite surprised, and then from there it just took off. But you know, I was never, you know, going to sign up with the NRA with looking at getting added publicity or anything. Yeah. I seriously, you know, want to be a part of this discussion because we're losing lives, whether they're the lives of innocent victims or whether it's the lives of young people just down the block. We've had a killing, or whether it's law enforcement, you know, who are equally vulnerable to this proliferation of illegal guns that come through the iron pipelines of I-80 or I-95.
So my question as well was sort of about this idea of critical mass. We know a lot of people, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, hate watch Fox News or CNBC, but how many people do you think need to be inside before some real change can happen in the organization of the NRA?
Well, I will say this. If you poll any person who is a faithful watcher of MSNBC, they watch Fox. Yeah. Because you want to hear what the opposition is saying. Why they, you know, why they hold this position so firmly. And likewise, avid Fox viewers, they listen to MSNBC. They listen to, you know, talk shows that are of the progressive mindset. So really, it's about me just, you know, kind of uncovering the veil, you know, looking behind the curtains to find out why are people so adamant about this Second Amendment? Why are they so adamant about, you know, not wanting to have real progressive, common sense gun control? Because it not only impacts, you know, the lives of fellow Americans, it impacts anyone who comes to New York, who works in New York, or visits New York, goes to school in New York. So that can be anyone. So let's be adults about it, and let's, you know, put all our cards on the table, and let me recognize you for who you are. You're not an enemy. You're a fellow American. But the same thing holds true for you when you look at me. I'm not an enemy of yours. I'm a fellow American.
So how does this play into sort of your philosophy of thinking nationally but acting locally? Because, the proliferation of guns is a national issue.
Yes, it is.
We look to the federal government for things, but, at the end of the day, people are arguing states' rights,
Right.
and, this gun pipeline, they make a lot of money off of this. So, how can you, once again, think nationally but act locally, especially in the terms of New York City?
Well, in 2012, in January, there was a poll taken of all Republican gun holding individuals, illegally gun holding individuals. 74% of those individuals polled wanted some gun reform measure, sensible gun reform measure. Subsequently, after that, we had the massacre in Sandy Hook in Connecticut. That number, polls of all Americans jumped to 84%. And then, so we know that the American public, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, whether you own a gun or you don't own a gun, they want some form of sensible gun reform measures. It's up to us as the elected officials at the local level and in Congress in Washington, D.C., to make sure that we convey that message to the rest of our bodies. Now, we in the state in the state of New York, we signed the New York SAFE Act, and I think that in large part, although we have not had massive gun shootings, our gun shootings are in isolation. But when you collectively put them together, they're the equivalent of several mass shootings.
Yeah. Several people were shot in Brooklyn, Queens last night.
Exactly. So, it's not just for us to say we passed our law. We wash our hands of the issue. Yeah. We're no longer involved in the discussion. Actually, it makes us a prime example of, hey, it can get done without infringing upon someone's rights to own a gun. But if it's sensible and if it's lawful, then we can all get on the same page in an effort to make our streets and our communities and neighborhoods safer.
So let me direct your attention now to the monitor. We got a chart that the folks at the Pew Research Center did. They talked to about 1,504 people to be exact, and they broke it down according to men and women and along party lines. And they found that black people, 52% of them, which is the largest percentage, in the question was thought that the NRA had too much influence over gun control laws. And if you look at the liberal Democrats just a little further down, 77% of them said there's too much control. So now that you are a member, do you feel more emboldened or more influential in terms of where gun laws should be going?
Look, as New Yorkers, we've just, buried Detective Holder in Guyana, who was gunned down in our own city streets. If that's not a wake-up call, and the many of young people whose lives, whose futures have been snuffed out because of gun violence, if that's not a wake-up call to us as New Yorkers that we have to do more, then I don't know what else could be expected of us to do. And that goes across the board. If you're a legislator, if you're a television host, or you're just a new New Yorker, we all have a responsibility to be a part of the narrative and the conversation and not leave it up to someone else to do. Because if that's the case, then we'll never get to a resolution.
Okay. Do you own a gun?
No, and I have no desire to own a gun. As I said, I really want to be a part of the narrative and have some type of ownership in that conversation.
So last night on 60 Minutes, Leslie Stahl interviewed a guy named Ron Conway, who's an angel investor. He got in on Facebook early. He's one of these people that gives seed money. And he's invested in 15 of these biometric guns that are supposed to be safe. It won't fire unless your fingerprint is on the thing. So he's saying, okay, leave all the controversy behind. Technology doesn't stop. No matter what side you're on, we're going to sort of advance our way out of this gun violence issue if we let technology take over. So do you think your time could be better spent working with people like him? New York is a thought leader in tech. Do you think it would be better to focus energy there instead of just joining the NRA?
Well, my my position has always been that you have to approach this from multiple angles. Whether it's working with the snug groups to deal with gun violence at its roots before it actually manifests itself, working with developers in an effort in unions in an effort to provide opportunities for young people who might be willing to want to enter the construction trade, or working with advocacy groups that will train young men and women to get them off the streets, so it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's not nearly just one thing that I can do that's going to, alleviate this issue. We have to understand that this is a very complex issue. I love everything that the tech industry is doing, but at the same time, we have over 300 million guns in our country. 200 of those are illegally held by Americans. By far, we have 50% of all illegal guns here in this country, yet we only represent 5% of the world population. So clearly, we're heading down a road where there's only destruction and despair if we don't take proactive steps as legislators, as community leaders, as just citizens of this country.
So in our last 60 seconds, you're a lawmaker in New York City. Tell us why you, of all people, need to join the NRA. Convince us why this isn't just a publicity stunt.
Well, I think that what you want to do, you want to be there at the front line. And it's one thing to have, press conferences when someone is gunned down or to write an op-ed, and that's good. We need that to keep the awareness, alive and in people's faces. But at the same time, there are people in this country who are having conversations not only about gun violence and gun rights, but also about who's going to be running for in their state capital, who's going to be running in there as members of Congress, who's going to be running this country as the president the next president of the United States. So it's not just about guns. It's also about politics and policies that will translate into whether or not we're going to have safer streets and safer communities and safer states. So it's far more complex and it's far more dimensional than people want to think on its face. But I think that's the argument that I would provide to any of my colleagues or anyone who would ask me why I joined the NRA. Why should they might take into consideration joining the NRA?
All right, that'll be the last word right there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Adam.
We appreciate it.
it.